Hi everybody. I want to welcome you all. My name is Nick Marshall, and I'm the manager of exhibitions and programs at the George Eastman Museum. Today's conversation with artist Alejandro Cartagena and associate curator Heather Shannon is in conjunction with the exhibition Foto Estructura, which is currently installed in the George Eastman Museum's Project Gallery. Before we get started, I first want to thank you all for joining us. We're very encouraged by the response we've received from our members and people across the globe as we've shifted many of our regularly scheduled in-person programs to online webinars. This, of course, gives us a broader reach, so our goal is to continue with the live broadcast as we shift back to doing programs at the museum when it's safe to do so. Our next webinar, Portrait of Jenny, the Rarest Cinematic Experience of All Time, will be on Thursday, June 4th at 1 p.m. with Curator of Film Exhibitions Jared Case, Preservation Manager Anthony Labate, and Chief Projectionist Spencer Cristiano. That group will talk about the film Portrait of Jenny, its technical peculiarities, how they fit in with cinema history, and how those aspects are recreated in a modern cinema. And then on Friday, June 5th at 1 p.m., Stephen B. and Janice G. Ashley Associate Curator Jamie Allen will virtually guide the audience through some of the books presented in B. Nettles' Harvest of Memory exhibition. So keep an eye out for those, and more information about them can be found, and other programs happening online can be found by subscribing to our newsletter if you haven't signed up for it already. If you go to our website, there's an easy form at the bottom of the page where all you have to do is enter your email address and you can select what type of updates you'd like to receive from the museum. If you have questions throughout today's talk, please submit them through the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There is a chat function, which we've kind of already started using to say hello and talk to each other. That is open, but it's really easiest and best for us if you can submit any questions that you have through the Q&A function. That way we can kind of track them and monitor them as we go along. At the end of Alejandro and Heather's conversation, I'll go through some of the questions with them, but if we don't have time to get to all of them, we'll do our best to reach out to the remaining questions with an answer through email. We will be recording today's webinar and putting it on our YouTube channel in the coming week. So if you'd like to go back and watch again or share with others, you'll be able to access it along with our other webinars and video content through YouTube. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Heather Shannon.
Thank you, Nick. My name is Heather Shannon. I'm an associate curator in the Department of Photography here at the George Eastman Museum. And it's my immense pleasure to introduce Alejandro Cartagena, with whom I basically collaborated on this exhibition. And this exhibition, I just want to mention, is presented in partnership with the Chrysler Museum of Art in Norfolk, Virginia. Alejandro is a well-known artist who works in Mexico. He's not only known for his social documentary photography, but also his book arts. His work has been exhibited in more than 50 exhibitions internationally, and his photographs are in the collections of the SF MoMA, the MFA Houston, and in the George Eastman Museum. And I'm just going to read a little paragraph introducing the exhibition Foto Estructura. This event was originally meant to be in the gallery, so it might be difficult, but I'd encourage you all to access the Matterport virtual tour and to look around the gallery as Alejandro and I talk. So here we go. Through a process of construction, destruction, and reconstruction, Alejandro Cartagena explores the formal and theoretical structures that shape the meaning of photographs. For his latest work, which is on display in Foto Estructura, he mines landfills for discarded photographs and creates his own archive. His found vernacular photographs recall those preserved in institutional archive collections: portraits, snapshots, tourist views, and the like. With a sharpened blade, Cartagena excises figures, faces, or other details from the photographs and reconfigures the original composition by moving the cut fragments or removing them entirely. His arrangements reveal that seemingly crucial aspects of a photograph are both central and incidental to our ability to read and understand the works. They remain strangely whole and strikingly familiar, compelling the viewer to consider what gives a photograph meaning. Is it the ubiquity of photographs, the general compositional uniformity of them, the individuals or sites pictured in them, the context in which we encounter the photograph, or the circumstances of creation? In his final act as artist-archivist, Cartagena provides context for the altered pictures, transferring them to a sphere as authoritative as that of the institutional archive, the museum. So thank you, Alejandro, for joining me today.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Nick, for inviting me. So excited to talk to you and to everybody who's watching.
So for years, you've focused your attention on the consequences of unchecked and unplanned urban growth on the people and landscapes of Mexico, particularly around Monterrey, where you live.
Yeah.
Can you explain how you came to your most recent approach to making work, which at first glance seems to be a radical departure from your past approach?
Yeah, I mean, I would dare to say that even my new work is still documentary in its essence, because I am concerned about how society is shaped, how we build the culture and how we live the culture we live in. And by doing photographs, I thought that that was the only way that I could actually address those issues. And it came a moment when I figured, like, I came to my senses and understood that I was following a structure that photography had built onto how to create images so that people could maybe think of the things that I was trying to say. So that and a lot of personal issues around the idea of traveling and being here in the studio, and then my obsession with archives, all of that came together to create experiments with images. And it started here. Thank you for putting that. It started with the work that you see here on the screen. On the left, you see one of my images from the Suburbia Mexicana work. This image I took, I think 2006 on the left. And then on the right, it's the same image. And this was the first series of experiments that ended up being an exhibition in Canada called Accumulations. And it was an accumulations of my work, but it was also an accumulation of messages. So that was the starting point to the idea that photography is not only what's represented, but it's also the structure that's needed to understand what's represented. And that just took me down a rabbit hole that ended up being that exhibition that's there at Eastman right now. But that picture on the right, that's a 30 by 40 inch print that we cut up into little 2 by 2 inches squares. And then we somehow created an image that for me resounded more with my original message of, we're building this it doesn't have any meaning. These buildings that we're building have no meaning. They're so generic. They're so like flat in themselves that there's no way people are connecting to them. There's no sense of place. And when we think of architecture as being something that molds who we are and who we will become, well, if we're building these type of houses and this type of urbanism, what's going to come out of that? And I mean, you just need to scratch the surface and look at what's happening in Mexico. I mean, we're still filled with corruption. There's so much violence happening against the general public, against women. And it seems like pretty obvious that if you build a society with this type of urbanism and architecture, we're going to have something that looks as violent as that picture you see on the right. You know, it's everybody stepping over everybody, and there's no sense of community, of cohesion. So I don't know, I think I took a leap of faith in cutting my work and trying to create these collages. But I mean, for me, it was a liberation of the idea that I was a documentary photography to becoming more of an author, of somebody who has ideas and is willing to risk those ideas, even if they contradict what I had done in the past. So I think that's really exciting for an artist to do that, because it's almost like, you know, you're not sure of anything, as is everybody else. Art isn't about truth. It isn't about stating this is what's happening, this is what it is. It's more of, this is my take on what's happening. So I really felt a departure from that structure that was fixing me in just one way to see the world. And suddenly I was able to do whatever I wanted. So I started to cut all my pictures, all the archive that I have amassed over the 3 or 4 years. I mean, all these boxes back here, all those are pictures that I bought here in Mexico, well, in Mexico City, and that are waiting for me to do something with them. So thousands and thousands of pictures that are getting a second life through my blade and my head.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'd actually like to talk about your interest in the archive, and this work, springboarding from manipulating your own work, took you back to where you began with photography.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, because you started your work as a photographer, as a photo technician or as a digitization technician at a photo archive.
Yeah.
So did you retrospectively see these structures in the photographs, or had you already noticed them as you did this work day after day, this documentary work? Can you explain your return to the archive?
Okay, so, I'll try to detangle that into something.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. So I started working in photography as a digitizer of an archive back in 2005. And back then I was super naive about everything that had to do with photography. So it was my experience there at least for the first 2 or 3 years was just doing my job. You know, I got from 50 to 100 images per day. I would scan them, and I was just learning how to really photograph by scanning other people's work. You know, I was learning from vernacular photography. I was learning from photography from professional photographers that their images and their negatives have ended up in their archive. And to be completely honest, I didn't think too much about it until maybe 10 years later, when I wanted to do work about my city, and I wasn't able to photograph things that were from the past. So the archive became this new camera that I could use. You know, I'm gonna do, see, that's the fun thing about the archive. It's almost the same thing as taking pictures. You have something in mind, you go to the archive, you search, you pick and choose. You don't like this, you like this, and you form your idea from images that are already there. So it was a project about a river here, the Santa Catarina River, and I wanted to do an idea of a timeline of how that river has, over the years, destroyed the city. You know, it's very strange, but Monterrey is pretty inland, but we get hurricanes from the Gulf of Mexico come inland and station themselves here in between the mountains and basically destroy the city. And that river is the conduit to that destruction. And there are images, the oldest image I found was from 1902 of hurricanes that have happened from 1902, 1903, 1918, and then in the 60s, and then in the 80s. And then I was lucky, but not, lucky in the sense that I was able to photograph one hurricane that happened here in 2010. So I wanted to create a timeline that showed all those hurricanes up to my experience as a citizen in the middle of the hurricane. So there was no other place to go but the archive. So that took me back to the archive, to the place. I had stopped working there five years, but you know, the people that worked there were the same people. So I told them the project. They were really enthusiastic about it. And I ended up publishing a book called Rivers of Power. And it's a broken timeline. It starts in the past, comes to the present with my pictures. And normally you go to a future, but no, I went back to the past because it's a circle. There's no flat timeline. It's a circle timeline because we don't understand that river you can't tame that river. It's something that's going to destroy us every single time because we've built this city that's just not right for that river. So that was the beginning of my second fascination with the archive. And then with those, being able to work with those images that weren't mine, I wanted to have my own archive. So I was lucky enough to be in Mexico City with a friend that's Jose Luis Cuevas, and he's like a hoarder of photographs, and old photographs. And he showed me, oh, look, this is what I've bought. And they were amazing, amazing images. I'm like, where do you get them? And he's like, oh, I'm going tomorrow morning. You want to come? I'm like, of course. So we ended up going to, it's a highway going out of Mexico City to Puebla, where there's one of the biggest dumps, like garbage dumps from Mexico City. And just outside the dump is a little tianguis where all people have scavenged through that garbage and are selling everything from discarded food, expired everything that's expired from the supermarkets ends up there in that market, and expired photographs, which we'll talk about in a moment. But yeah, and so I became fascinated, and I would go at least once a month to Mexico City and buy, and then I started to amass this massive archive of old photographs. And then I couldn't go. And so I contracted an assistant, and he would go twice a month and get images for me. Like I would give him guidelines. I need this, 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 and this. And I didn't know what I was going to do with all this. It was just the hoarder in me. I want to buy, I want to have these images. And then maybe I've derailed from your question, but it's okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I ended up getting to this project from a tangent situation where my printer person sent me a group photograph of a school by mistake, and I put it on my wall in front of me here, and it lay on the wall for about 3 months, and I don't know why I was attracted to it. It's just a simple 30 people group photograph of a graduating class from high school. And at that moment, I was going through some personal turmoil that, didn't let me work. I'm being brutally honest, but I was depressed. I just sat in front of the computer and do nothing for hours. And that picture was there all the time, looking at me. And so I asked one of my assistants to cut the people out of the picture, and just to leave the empty space there. And we tried to do some collages with the people, and it didn't really do anything for me. And that whole, just, looking at it over and over again, just created, it was something like this, just created something in me that I related personally, I related professionally. It talked about my obsessiveness with the archive. It talked about how I would never, ever in the past break an image, but because I was breaking inside, I was breaking myself, I was willing to do whatever, I wanted, and whatever it took to take me somewhere else. So that is the inception kind of part of the project. Does that make sense? I hope
it does make sense. It does make sense. I'm as you're talking, I'm realizing that you're an archivist, a collector, and a curator, because you're all these things wrapped up into one.
Yeah.
And I was actually thinking maybe you could describe your curatorial, that is your selective and interpretive process, because you're making selections or you're giving instructions for selections, but then you're also, your intervention, your cutting is an interpretation of the photograph. So I'm wondering if you could expand on that.
I mean, I guess that comes from being obsessed with the history of photography. And I came into the photography game, I thought late. I was 27 when I quit my job working in a restaurant as a cook and as a manager. And so the history of photography is a thing of, you know, segmenting and curating and ordering all these different authors. So I think I felt a connection with the idea of ordering thoughts of photography or of ordering photographs. So that be from the books that I was reading or looking at, and then working in the archive as a digitizer. There's also an organizing of the archive. So it's the archive of this person, but then we're going to scan his portraits. We're going to scan his landscapes. I mean, it's really basic, but if you don't see it in practice, you don't really understand that you can create meaning through groupings, through curating. So, I mean, it's not that I am a curator, but I guess in a way I have the eye to actually pinpoint things that have connections and meanings that are repeating over and over again, which is exactly what this exhibition is about. You're smart, you're pushing me that way to say these things. So yeah, I mean, the idea of selecting and ordering is something that I think is the first step to actually being an artist, is understanding that all that you do has a place in your work. So if you look at my 15 years of work, there's always interconnections between the series, because it's about me in the end. It's like, it's my head. These things can't be isolated, even though stylistically it's almost like I'm 5 different artists at the same time. It's all about the idea behind the work. So I've also been like, when I was working in the archive 2005-06, I couldn't buy work because I was, you know, poor. I'm still poor, but I went to the internet to get images. So I learned how to hack into video cameras and would, you know, get images from video cameras and create this. I created this digital archive of parts of the world that I was interested. I have images from the US border. I have images from cities, and all those images, or that practice, is exactly what I'm doing now, only with a physical object. And there's always all those practices have a meaning. Sometimes I'm not ready to understand them, but I am willing to wait. And that's what I did with all these images. I started buying 4 years ago, and it took 2 years to actually figure out, oh, this is what I can do with these words. You know, when I started to do the groupings, like here, the Gerber babies is like the perfect example. You have images that are maybe 20 to 30 years apart from when they were produced. And when I was looking at them with the faces, it was so disturbing to see, like, this is exactly the same baby, even though they're different parents from different generations, but we're creating this very specific way of how we want to see our children. What is this? And when it started with the groups, then with the Gerber babies, and then with the groups with the faces, when people are too close to the edges, then the groups basically started to talk to me about, hey, there's a structure, there is a way in how we create photography that is very generic, and nobody's talking about that. It's always about what's in the image. You know, photography is a very in Spanish we call it sigilosa. How do you say it? It's like a very sneaky. It's a very sneaky medium because it's about nostalgia. It's about memory. So as soon as you see an image, you're seduced into, like, you lower your guard. It's like, oh, what is this? Who is this person? When did this happen? Oh, it looks from such a long time ago. And suddenly your guard is down and you're believing what you're seeing in the image. And I fell for it, you know? And I fell for it even as being a photographer. So I wanted to test that. I wanted to question my own production. And like I said before, I mean, this is part of my poetry. It's about questioning my own medium. So that's kind of the answer to your question.
Well, actually, I to follow up with one of the questions I actually prepared. Several months ago, I gave a tour of the exhibition, and I noticed that our visitors very much identified with them and related to them, and seeing like familiar pictures in their own family albums. So the absence of some of the most important details of photographs, the faces and the figures, it allows us to identify with the work. Can you talk about what do you think the implications of this are? Like what we would normally or typically think of as the most important part of the photograph is gone, but that allows us to identify with them the most. And I think Boy Doing Things is a great example of that. We all have these kinds of childhood pictures, and the boy doing things, just for people at home who haven't gotten to see the exhibition, he's kicking balls, he's running, he's playing in the dirt, he's riding bicycles, sort of all the hallmarks of a happy childhood. And when you take him out, he, first of all, is it a boy? It's hard to tell. I mean, Alejandro knew he was a boy, from certain social markers, but we can all identify ourselves in here. And I think family vacation is another really good example of this. We all have, a lot of us are lucky enough to have vacation pictures where we posed in the water or sitting in a lounge chair. So can you speak to the sort of paradox or that tension between absence and us, and what you said about memory, where we fill in the blanks? We're compelled to.
So I think this comes from, or creating this tension comes from my bookmaking practice, where there is very much an idea of a sequence of images creating a greater idea, a gestaltic gesture where you have bits and pieces that have created a tension. And when you finish looking at the book, hopefully you'll get the bigger picture, right? And that, when I was starting to do the cuts, yes, they were amusing when they were just one image, but it was the grouping that I thought created the second meaning. The meaning that this is not something that's unique to you as a person. This is photography coding you to how you should act in front of the camera, and how the camera is going to help you create your family idea, So the tension is, I don't create the tension. It's there because people aren't there, but it's really quickly satisfied. It's almost like a musical cadence. You have this, you have these three chords, like a stabilizing chord, a destabilizing chord, and then a chord that brings you home. And this is what the individual images, I think, are the tensioning chords, but the group is like the satisfying chord. It's like you're home. And so I think that's the play that I wanted to have with the spectator. You're going to be tense, but then you're going to understand that it's you. It's about you. But it's also about how you haven't paid attention to this mechanism that has created a story about who you are and how you look and how you will look to other people in the future. So And it's also a question about individuality. I mean, are we really individual? We have all these things that create our sense of self, but they're all coordinated to make us think that we are individual. But are we? I mean, I can't state that we're not, but are we? It's a question. It's a big, big, big question that I'm asking. And I've had people talk to me about how they see the work more about identity than about structures. And I was talking about this yesterday in the Spanish talk. It is about identity, and it is about loss, and it is about absence. It's about all those things. But as an artist, you have to have a responsibility to where you're standing with your work. That doesn't mean that people aren't going to read it in several ways. And that doesn't mean that I didn't know that all those readings were going to come out. It's just that having that place from where I'm going to create all the project, all the series, is what motivates me. So I'm being able to produce more and more work. Because if I'm trying to satisfy all the different readings, it's just, it's going to be so chaotic that it won't make sense. And I mean, maybe I'm being too selfish, but the person for whom it needs to make sense the most is for me, because this is who I am. So I need to know what I'm doing, and then, I'll leave it for you, not for leave it for interpretation, but if you ask me, I am going to tell you where I am standing. And that, I think, is a big responsibility for 21st century artists. Like, you need to know where you stand with your work, where you're coming from, where your references are, where your inspirations are. It's a personal work. Yes, it's personal, but is it about that personal thing in you? No, it's not. That's my motivation. That's what's really pushing me to do something that nobody's asking me to do. As an artist, there's nobody forcing you to work. So you have to find that personal connection with your work. And is it there? Yes. Is it about that? No. And yes. So I hope that kind of sums up the idea. I mean, in my psychotherapy, we talked about this work, and of course it was like, off the bat, this is when I was going through a really troubled time with my family. And I felt that I had to become somebody else. Like, I could not still be that Alejandro with those paradigms that I had grown up with, those family paradigms, those personal paradigms, those love paradigms. And I needed to switch my mind into somebody else, into something else. And this is, if we want to psychoanalyze these images, this is me trying to make my work be something else. And was it cathartic? Yes, it was. But is the work about that? Yes and no. I would argue that more no, but it's there. You can't avoid it.
Well, that's actually really interesting, because you've referred to your photographs as expired. Mm-hmm. And I'd like you to explain what you mean by that, but I also want you to talk about the paradox of restoring meaning through destruction, which I think you're sort of hinting at with your psychotherapy. Like, there's a restorative gesture in altering or destroying something. And I see that in your work, and I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Okay.
So, or if you totally disagree with me.
No, I do. I love these spontaneous conversations, because suddenly it's like, whoa, I did not know even that was happening. But when you were just mentioning about the psychotherapy is about going to the past, understanding what happened, rethinking it, how you see that happened, and then you can't make it go away, but you can look at it in a new way. So I'm looking at these old photographs, I'm destroying what they were supposed to be, and creating this new thing that has a new meaning that was there in the past, but because it wasn't expired in the past, somebody had their emotions, somebody had their meaning clinging to those images. You couldn't read it in that other way. they needed to expire. They needed to have that emotional attachment for which they were made thrown away. So people who did these images are not interested in what was portrayed there emotionally or sentimentally or in memory. They've decided that that image has expired what it was made for. So as our consumer world is, we just throw away the things we don't think are needed anymore. So this happens with photographs. And once that image has expired, there's no pressure to knowing who these people are, because they've already said, we don't care who these people are. So I'm not an archivist. I'm not a collector who's, trying to figure out, oh, who is this person? Who were their family? I mean, I'm not interested in that, because that is what's being done in many places, in many archives, including the George Eastman. You thrive in understanding what's in the image. I thrive in not knowing what's in the image. So they're parallel paths, and we've created this exhibition that unites this obsessiveness with the archive and knowing how is it made, the technique, who are the people, the time where the photograph was taken, the format. And I'm not interested in that, but somehow we've created this, dissonance that creates beautiful music about how we see photographs and how photographs have created us and the way we see ourselves for more than 150 years. So the idea of expiration of these photographs was a catalyst. I mean, I remember when we were talking about this almost 2 years ago, and when I don't know if I had it already in my mind, or it was because of the conversations on and on that we were having, that it was like, that's it, this is so important, the expiration of a photograph, the inutilidad, how do you say that in English? The unusefulness of a photograph. What is that? What can happen after that? Can it be reused? Can it be transformed into something new? I mean, I think all of those ideas came up with conversations with you, and the fun part is that it was there in the images. It was there in the work. Like, I was producing, but it's through these conversations that suddenly you get these aha moments that you understand even deeper what you're doing or trying to do.
Those conversations were really fun.
Yeah.
They were helpful for me too.
Yes.
So you alluded to your book arts.
Yeah.
And you've talked about ordering and archiving, and that seems like, and sequencing, and your grids. But I was wondering how you anticipate integrating this project into your book arts practice.
That has been a heartache.
Okay.
A headache, not a heartache, a headache and a heartache. I don't know if I can. I do not know if I can. I have like a proposal to do a book about this work, but I just can't. There is something about the physicality of the objects and them becoming almost like a sculpture. And we talked about this. These are individual sculptures. The way we mount them creates these shadows that give them a 3D sensation to them. And you can notice on the image, they're not flat. They're really physical in a way that I don't know how that would translate to a book. It's been almost a year since I got the proposal to do the book, and I cannot advance. It's just, I don't know how to do it, because the physicality part of it is so determinant of the meaning of the work. So, maybe, I glance over there and there is there's a family album of that I found in one of these dumpsters that is like this woman's parents before they had her, the birth of her, and all her life until she was like in a nursing home. So I have this book. Basically, it's already done, and I want to do. That's the book. That's the only like piece of work of all these images that I've worked with that I think could be translated into a book, and maybe think of it like this could be anybody's life from beginning to end, you know? So there's images of her with girlfriends, her playing volleyball, her first day at work, her first car. I mean, the stereotypes of where photography goes in and documents, they're there. So that's the closest I've come. But I don't know if it's gonna happen. Yeah.
So Alejandro, how has this most recent project, how do you think it will impact your social documentary work? Which what do you think it's going, how has it freed you from the structures that sort of inhibited you maybe? It seems to be what you suggested at the beginning of the conversation, that you felt inhibited by these structures.
Yeah, I mean, you could say inhibited, but it's almost, it's not exactly that. It's more of it's like a paradigm. You don't know you're in it. And it's so comforting to be in a paradigm because you already know this is as far as you're gonna go, here, 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 and here.
You know the rules.
Excuse me?
You know the rules.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think this new work has pushed me to think of documentary style work as based in reality. I think that's how I see all my work now. It's not documentary, it's based on reality. And what I do with that, that's where I feel completely free now. I can go wherever I want. I can do collage, I can do installation, I can do books, I can do whatever I want. So there was a moment of crisis in my work because I questioned the idea, what if I would have gone to sculpture workshops instead of photography workshops? Would I ended up being a sculptor or a painter? But I ended up going to photography workshops back in 2004. And I said, okay, I'm gonna try other things, like just change medium completely. And somehow I always came back to photography because I am fascinated with the idea of what photographs do. That seduction that it has, that closeness to making people think that it's real what you're looking at. And that doesn't happen in painting. That doesn't happen in sculpture. And I like that. I like that game of reality and fiction always happening. And so, yeah, I mean, that's where I am right now at this moment, thinking of doing work that's based in reality. Yeah.
So I think I think we've covered all my questions plus a few more.
Okay.
So I think we should open up for questions from the audience.
Okay.
Okay. So the first question that I want to get to, I'm going to go ahead and answer. I'm going to give my answer to the question. My answer is yes. Here's the question. Given the self-analytic nature of the artist, would you recommend psychoanalysis for your fellow artists?
You said, yeah. Do you want me to answer too?
Yeah, you should answer too. The question was for you.
Yeah, my ex-wife is a psychoanalyst, and I, for years, stayed away from psychoanalysis because I thought that if I were to go back and resolve those issues I had growing up, then I wouldn't have food to actually go out, like emotional food to go out and create work. But on the contrary, I found even deeper stuff that I didn't even know was there. So yes, I would definitely recommend you become a healthier person, which is something, that we should all thrive for, to have better mental health. So yeah, definitely do it as an artist, as a person. this is the I think you say caveat of that. It hurts.
Mhm.
It really hurts. Like you will find things that you didn't even know hurt you, that you weren't prepared as a kid or as a young adult to think of it in a different way. But once you think of it and you take away that surface and you see what really happened, it's overwhelming. But those shocks are, I think, what propels you forward as a human being and as an artist. So definitely yes.
I agree. Another question came in. Do you work on copies of the photographs that you did not originate, or do you destroy originals?
Okay, I do both. I think the first year I started to do the cutting was all on originals. But then there was a moment where there were series, like parts of, like, it's a big project and it has sub-series, right? And some of those series, I wasn't too clear of what the outcome would be. So we started to do like scan the images and print them out, and then cut the print. And that helped sometimes. And then I got an assistant that was pretty savvy with Photoshop. And she started to scan them and do it digitally. But I would say maybe 20% of the work was produced that way, because most of them, I was pretty sure by looking at the grouping on the wall with the people still there, that it was going to work without the people there. So yeah, both things. I've done the two. And there is some exciting and pain with working directly with the object, because there's a pressure that if it's not cut right, that's it. There's no turning back. So I kind of imbued that in my assistants, that, you know, we need to do it this way, because it's gonna be, there's excitement about that. You're really creating something that is gonna be so unique and you can't go back.
And I just want to mention that all of the work in the show are their original photographs. They're all altered. Yeah. There's no facsimiles.
No.
So I'm gonna actually combine two questions. One's kind of more of a thought, and then the other is a question from two different people. One was that there's such an interesting visual conversation between this work and Sarah Charlesworth's Objects of Desires series. And then to get to the question part of that, someone else had asked, who are your references?
I mean, I would start with some text that I read back in 2005 called The Poetics of Space. And in that book,
Bachelard.
Yeah, exactly. The ideas in that book really formed the way that I think of photography. And when I started to do the cutouts, and especially the groupings, that was really present. But like aesthetically, the collages, the people who did collages in the 20th century, all the constructivists, Rodchenko, Lissitzky, Lola Alvarez Bravo, more recent, more contemporary, John Baldessari, of course. I mean, he's a very quick reference to the work. And John Stesker, I really enjoyed his work.
Funny, I wrote down Baldessari's name as you were talking, because there was something that you said that like reminded me so much of, like, when you were talking about working with the archive, like, you know, Baldessari has this quote of saying, you know, why like make a word for house when that like word already exists, right?
Exactly.
So like he just finds the picture of the house.
Yeah. I mean, he definitely marked the way I think about photography and about art. I mean, I try to amalgamate all the different things that I've read, I've seen, and have a standpoint, you know, and make a proposition. And it's not about repeating and doing exactly the same thing. I mean, there's nothing new to be done in reality, but there are new ways to think what has been done. And I think that's where I stand with my references and ideas.
And let's see here. So Someone said, I loved your book, Los Sumergidos.
Uh-huh.
Did I pronounce that right?
Los Sumergidos.
Sumergidos, right. Who was your favorite collaborator in that project? Best looking?
Okay, so Los Sumergidos, just a quick summary. It's 5 authors, or we're 5 collaborators, an editor, a writer, and 3 photographers. And we all pinched in materials that we already had and created this story about a woman that traveled from Mexico to the US and then disappeared. And we created this story that is very much based in reality about many, many people that have this thing happen to them of leaving their country and going to another country and then disappearing. And you know, who was my favorite collaborator? I think all of them. I mean, I couldn't say one in particular. There were so many fights, so many pushing and pulls. I think that when those things happened, that, you know, one was very much in like, it has to be this way, and then the other was, it has to be this way. I think that was one of the most fruitful things of collaborating as a group. The letting go of the ideas that you had to bracing and thinking in another way. So I think I would take, that's my favorite part of that collaboration.
Yeah. Heather, do you have anything you want to add?
No. Thanks for asking.
You're so quiet.
Okay, well, so I apologize to those whose questions we didn't get a chance to get to, or maybe hopefully some of the stuff that came out in the Q&A maybe answered some of your questions. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Alejandro and Heather, for the great talk. And we will, like I said, we are recording this, so check back on our YouTube page to see the recording, and we'll send out a follow-up email to everybody once it goes live, just to send you the link in case you're looking for it. So thanks again, and hope to see you all at our next live webinar. Take care.